The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Kate carefully applied her lipstick in the ornate mirror. Today was different from her usual royal duties. She was scheduled to visit 3 hospitals, attend a charity lunch, and finish with an evening gala. The packed schedule would test even the most energetic person, but Kate had always prided herself on her stamina and dedication to her royal responsibilities. William knocked gently on her dressing room door. "Ready for today, darling?" he asked, stepping inside and adjusting his tie. He looked concerned as he noticed the slight tension around her eyes. Kate had been working tirelessly for the past month, barely taking time to rest between engagements. "Almost," Kate replied, smoothing down her elegant blue dress. She had chosen it specifically for the hospital visits, knowing that children always responded well to bright, cheerful colors. "I just need to grab my notes for the speech at St. Mary's." As they walked down the corridor together, William couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Kate's usual confident stride. She seemed to be walking more carefully, and her usual bright chatter was replaced by focused concentration on her upcoming duties. Their first stop was St. Mary's Children's Hospital in London. Kate had been patron of the hospital for several years and genuinely loved her visits there. The children always brought out her most natural, warm personality. As they arrived, dozens of staff members, photographers, and excited families were waiting in the main lobby. Kate stepped out of the car with her trademark smile, waving to the crowd that had gathered outside. She spent the next 2 hours touring the pediatric ward, reading stories to young patients and speaking with worried parents. Her genuine compassion shone through as she sat beside a little girl named Emma, who was recovering from heart surgery. "Your princess dress is beautiful," Kate told Emma, admiring the child's pink hospital gown that had been decorated with sparkly stickers by the nursing staff. Emma beamed with pride and showed Kate her collection of get-well cards from classmates. During her visit to the cardiac unit, Kate listened intently as Dr. Richards explained the new equipment the hospital had purchased with funds from her charity foundation. She asked detailed questions about how the machines worked and how they would help save children's lives. The technical discussion went on for nearly 30 minutes as Kate took careful notes. By the time they left St. Mary's, Kate's energy was already beginning to flag slightly, though she hid it well from the cameras and crowds. William noticed her gripping his arm a bit tighter as they walked back to the car, and her smile seemed to require more effort than usual. Their second hospital visit was to Royal London Hospital, where Kate was scheduled to open a new maternity wing. The ceremony involved cutting a ribbon, touring the facilities, and meeting with expectant mothers and new families. Kate threw herself into the role with her usual enthusiasm, but William could see the strain beginning to show around her eyes. During the tour of the maternity ward, Kate spent considerable time with Sarah, a new mother who had given birth just 2 days earlier. They discussed the challenges of early motherhood, and Kate shared some of her own experiences with George, Charlotte, and Louis. The conversation was deeply personal and meaningful, but it also required significant emotional energy that Kate was beginning to run low on. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew a large crowd of local officials, hospital staff, and media. Kate delivered her speech flawlessly, highlighting the importance of quality maternal care and thanking the dedicated medical staff. However, as she spoke, William noticed that she was gripping the podium slightly tighter than necessary, and there were brief moments where she seemed to pause longer than usual between sentences. After the ceremony, they had a brief car ride to their third hospital visit at Great Ormond Street. In the privacy of their vehicle, Kate finally allowed herself to relax slightly. She leaned back against the leather seat and closed her eyes for a moment. "How are you holding up?" William asked gently, taking her hand in his. Her skin felt slightly clammy, which concerned him. "I'm fine," Kate replied automatically, though even she could hear the exhaustion in her own voice. "Just need to get through Great Ormond Street, then we can have a quick break before the lunch." William studied her face carefully. He had known Kate for over 2 decades, and he could read her better than anyone else. The slight pallor in her cheeks and the way she was unconsciously massaging her temples told him that she was pushing herself too hard. But he also knew that Kate was incredibly dedicated to her charitable work and wouldn't want to disappoint the children and families who were counting on her visit. Great Ormond Street Hospital was perhaps the most emotionally demanding stop of the day. As one of the world's leading children's hospitals, it treated some of the sickest young patients, and Kate always felt the weight of responsibility to bring hope and comfort to families going through unimaginably difficult times. She spent over an hour in the cancer ward, sitting with children who were undergoing treatment and their exhausted parents. Each conversation required her to be fully present and emotionally available, offering genuine comfort and encouragement. Kate had a remarkable ability to connect with people in crisis, but it came at a personal cost. One particularly heart-wrenching conversation was with Michael, an 8-year-old boy who had been battling leukemia for over a year. His mother broke down in tears while describing the challenges of watching her son go through chemotherapy. Kate held the woman's hands and listened with complete attention, offering both practical resources and emotional support. By the time they finished at Great Ormond Street, Kate was running purely on adrenaline and determination. The emotional weight of the morning's visits, combined with the physical demands of being on for hours, had taken a significant toll. William could see that she was struggling, though she continued to maintain her composed public demeanor. As they walked toward their car, Kate stumbled slightly on a small step. William quickly steadied her, and she laughed it off as catching her heel on the pavement. But he noticed that her laugh sounded forced, and she was leaning more heavily on his arm than usual. The charity lunch was being held at the Dorchester Hotel, and Kate knew that over 200 supporters would be there specifically to see her and hear about the hospital projects she had just visited. The lunch was crucial for fundraising efforts, and many of the attendees had paid substantial amounts for their tickets with the expectation of an engaging presentation from the Duchess. During the car ride to the hotel, Kate tried to review her notes for the lunch speech, but she found it increasingly difficult to focus. The words seemed to blur together slightly, and she realized she had a growing headache. She attributed it to the emotional intensity of the hospital visits and the lack of proper breakfast that morning. William kept glancing at her with growing concern. "Kate, you look pale. Maybe we should consider postponing the lunch." "Absolutely not," Kate replied firmly, though her voice lacked its usual strength. "These people have planned this event for months. The fundraising is too important to cancel now." As they pulled up to the Dorchester, Kate took a deep breath and mentally prepared herself for another 2 hours of being completely engaged and enthusiastic. The lunch would require her to give a speech, participate in a question and answer session, and personally thank major donors. She couldn't afford to show any signs of weakness or fatigue. The hotel's elegant ballroom was filled with supporters, many of whom Kate had worked with for years on various charitable projects. She greeted each table personally, shaking hands and having brief conversations with attendees. Her genuine warmth and interest in their contributions was evident, but William could see that each interaction was requiring more effort than usual. During the meal, Kate picked at her food while continuing to engage with the guests at her table. She was seated between Lord Harrison, a major hospital benefactor, and Mrs. Chen, a prominent pediatric surgeon. Both were eager to discuss specific projects and funding needs, requiring Kate to be mentally sharp and fully present for complex conversations about medical equipment and facility improvements. As the time for her speech approached, Kate excused herself to the ladies' room to freshen up and review her notes one final time. Standing in front of the ornate mirror, she splashed cool water on her wrists and took several deep breaths. The face looking back at her was paler than usual, and she noticed that her hands were trembling slightly as she applied fresh lipstick. When she returned to the ballroom, the master of ceremonies was beginning his introduction. Kate took her place at the podium, looking out at the expectant faces of over 200 supporters who had gathered specifically to hear about her morning hospital visits and the ongoing fundraising needs. Kate gripped the sides of the podium as she began her speech, drawing strength from the familiar routine of public speaking. Her voice was clear and strong as she described the morning's hospital visits, sharing touching stories about the children and families she had met. The audience listened intently as she painted vivid pictures of little Emma with her sparkly hospital gown and brave Michael fighting his battle with leukemia. As she spoke about the new maternity wing at Royal London Hospital, Kate felt a strange wave of dizziness wash over her. She paused momentarily, taking what appeared to be a dramatic pause for effect, but was actually her body demanding a moment to steady itself. The feeling passed quickly, and she continued with her description of holding newborn babies and supporting new mothers. William watched from his table near the front, his concern growing as he noticed subtle changes in Kate's presentation style. Her usually fluid gestures seemed slightly more controlled, and there were moments where she gripped the podium more tightly than necessary. To most of the audience, she appeared as polished and engaging as always, but William could read the signs of her increasing fatigue. The speech continued for 15 more minutes as Kate outlined specific funding needs and thanked major donors by name. She spoke passionately about the life-saving equipment that donations had already purchased and painted an inspiring vision of what could be accomplished with continued support. Her genuine emotion when describing the children's courage brought several audience members to tears. As she reached the conclusion of her prepared remarks, Kate felt another wave of dizziness, this one stronger than before. The bright lights of the ballroom seemed to intensify, creating an almost overwhelming glare. She blinked several times and forced herself to focus on her closing words about the power of collective compassion and the difference that each person in the room could make. The audience erupted in enthusiastic applause as Kate finished her speech. She smiled and waved, but William could see that her smile was strained. As she stepped away from the podium, she moved more carefully than usual, and he noticed her discreetly placing one hand on a nearby chair for support. The question and answer session that followed was typically one of Kate's favorite parts of these events. She enjoyed the opportunity to have more detailed conversations about the causes she cared about and to address specific concerns from supporters. Today, however, each question felt like it required enormous effort to process and respond to thoughtfully. Dr. C. Williams, a retired pediatric oncologist, asked about the psychological support services available for families dealing with childhood cancer. Kate's response was comprehensive and heartfelt, drawing on her conversations with parents that morning, but she found herself struggling to organize her thoughts as clearly as usual. Mrs. Thompson, whose foundation had funded several pieces of medical equipment, inquired about the timeline for the new surgical suite at Great Ormond Street. Kate provided detailed information about the construction phases and expected completion dates, but William noticed that she was referring to her notes more frequently than she typically needed to. As the formal portion of the lunch concluded, Kate was expected to circulate among the tables for individual conversations with major donors. This was always the most personally demanding part of these events, requiring her to be fully present and engaged with each person while remembering details about their previous contributions and family situations. At the first table, she spent 10 minutes with the Richardson family, who had lost their own daughter to a rare genetic condition and had since become major supporters of pediatric research. Kate listened as Mrs. Richardson shared updates about their latest fundraising efforts, but she found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on the details of research grants and clinical trials. Lord and Lady Morrison were eager to discuss their plans for a new children's garden at one of the hospitals. Kate had previously been very involved in the design discussions, but today she struggled to recall specific details about plant selections and playground equipment that had been decided in previous meetings. By the time she reached the fifth table, Kate was beginning to feel genuinely unwell. The combination of emotional exhaustion from the hospital visits, physical fatigue from hours of standing and walking, and the mental demands of constant engagement was taking a serious toll. She felt slightly nauseous and noticed that the voices around her seemed to be coming from farther away than usual. William had been watching her carefully and could see that she was struggling. When she briefly caught his eye across the room, he could see a look of concern in her expression that she was trying hard to hide from the guests around her. He began making his way through the crowd toward her, politely excusing himself from his own conversations. At the final table, Kate sat down for what was supposed to be a brief chat with the hospital's board of directors. They were eager to discuss expansion plans and wanted her input on several major decisions. As they spread architectural drawings across the table, Kate found that the detailed floor plans seemed to blur together. She nodded and made appropriate comments, but she was having difficulty following the complex discussion about surgical suite layouts and equipment placement. Dr. Phillips, the hospital's chief administrator, was explaining the challenges of balancing patient capacity with staff requirements when Kate realized that his words were becoming increasingly hard to understand. It wasn't that she couldn't hear him clearly. Rather, her brain seemed unable to process the information effectively. She felt as though she was listening to a conversation through thick glass. Kate excused herself from the table, claiming she needed to check on the final details for the evening gala. William immediately moved to her side as she stood up, and he could feel the slight tremor in her arm as she took his offered support. "I think we should consider postponing the gala," William said quietly as they moved toward a more private corner of the ballroom. "I just need a few minutes of fresh air," Kate replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "There are still 2 hours before we need to be at the venue, and people have bought tickets specifically to support the children's cardiac unit." They stepped out onto the hotel's private terrace, where Kate gratefully breathed in the cool afternoon air. The noise and intensity of the crowded ballroom had been more overwhelming than she had realized, and the quiet outdoor space provided immediate relief. She sat down on an ornate bench and closed her eyes for a moment. William sat beside her, studying her face with growing alarm. Her skin had a grayish pallor, and there were dark circles under her eyes that her makeup couldn't completely hide. More concerning was the slight confusion he had noticed in her responses during the last few conversations. "Kate, you're not well," he said firmly but gently. "You've been pushing yourself too hard for weeks, and today has been particularly demanding." Kate opened her eyes and tried to muster her usual determined expression. "I'm fine, William. Really. It's just been a long day. And I didn't eat much at breakfast. Once I have something to eat and a cup of tea, I'll be perfectly ready for the gala." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, while Kate tried to regain her equilibrium. The fresh air did seem to help, and her nausea began to subside. She felt foolish for allowing herself to become so overwhelmed and was determined to push through the evening's final commitment. The drive back to Kensington Palace gave Kate an opportunity to rest before the evening gala. She leaned against William's shoulder and dozed fitfully during the 30-minute journey. William instructed their driver to take the longer route to give her additional time to recover. At the palace, Kate had planned to take a proper break, have some tea and sandwiches, and change into her evening gown. However, when they arrived, there were several urgent messages waiting that required her immediate attention. The gala organizers needed final approval on the seating arrangements, the auction items required last-minute descriptions, and there was a scheduling conflict with one of the evening's speakers that needed to be resolved. Instead of resting, Kate spent the next hour on phone calls and reviewing documents. She worked with her assistant to finalize the auction catalog and personally called the backup speaker to confirm his availability. While handling these responsibilities, she mechanically ate a few bites of a sandwich and drank 2 cups of strong tea. William watched her with increasing frustration as she threw herself back into work mode instead of taking care of herself. He knew that Kate felt a deep sense of responsibility to everyone who was counting on the evening's success, but he was genuinely worried about her ability to get through several more hours of public appearances. As Kate prepared for the gala, she chose an elegant emerald green gown that would photograph beautifully under the ballroom lights. The dress was one of her favorites, and she hoped that looking her best would help her feel more confident about getting through the evening. While styling her hair and applying fresh makeup, Kate began to feel slightly more like herself. The brief rest and the familiar routine of preparing for a formal event helped restore some of her usual energy and composure. She practiced her auction introduction in the mirror and reviewed her mental notes about the various supporters who would be attending. William appeared in their dressing room wearing his formal evening wear, looking handsome but concerned. He had been hoping that the break would allow Kate to recover fully, but he could still see signs of strain in her posture and expression. "You don't have to do this tonight," he said one final time as they prepared to leave. "We could send our regrets and reschedule your appearances." Kate turned to face him with a determined expression that reminded him of why he had fallen in love with her strength and dedication. "William, this gala will raise money that will directly save children's lives. I've met some of those children today. I've held their hands and promised their parents that we won't give up fighting for them. I can't break that promise because I'm having a difficult day." The drive to the gala venue was quiet, with both Kate and William lost in their own thoughts. Kate reviewed her evening responsibilities one more time, greeting VIP guests, participating in a brief photo session, giving remarks about the day's hospital visits, introducing the auction items, and thanking major supporters personally. As their car approached the venue, Kate could see photographers and news crews setting up outside. The gala had attracted significant media attention, and she knew that any signs of illness or fatigue would be scrutinized in tomorrow's newspapers. She took several deep breaths and mentally prepared herself for what would hopefully be the final challenge of this exceptionally long day. The grand ballroom at the Savoy was transformed into a glittering showcase for the evening's charity gala. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over elegantly dressed guests, and the tables were adorned with centerpieces featuring white roses and elegant candles. Kate and William arrived to find over 400 supporters gathered for what had become one of the most anticipated charity events of the social season. Kate stepped out of the car with her practiced smile firmly in place, though William could feel the tension in her grip as she took his arm. The camera flashes were intense, and she paused for several posed photographs before making her way into the venue. The photographers called out encouraging words about her beautiful gown and her dedication to the children's hospitals. Inside the ballroom, Kate was immediately surrounded by eager supporters wanting to greet her personally. She moved gracefully from group to group, thanking major donors and listening to their questions about the hospital projects. Her training and years of experience allowed her to function effectively, even while feeling increasingly unwell. Lord Hamilton, the gala's honorary chairman, approached with several international supporters who had traveled specifically for the event. Kate engaged them in conversation about global pediatric healthcare initiatives, drawing on her extensive knowledge of similar programs in other countries. However, William noticed that she was blinking more frequently than usual and occasionally pausing mid-sentence as if gathering her thoughts. The VIP reception area had been set up in an adjacent room where Kate was expected to have more intimate conversations with the evening's largest contributors. These were the supporters whose donations would fund entire equipment purchases or facility renovations, and they deserved personal attention and detailed discussions about how their money would be used. Mrs. Blackwell, whose foundation was considering a £1 million contribution for a new cardiac surgery suite, wanted to discuss the technical specifications and expected patient outcomes. Kate provided comprehensive information about the surgical equipment and shared stories about children who would benefit from the improved facilities. The conversation was exactly the type of detailed, important discussion that made these events worthwhile, but it required intense concentration that was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. During her conversation with Dr. Peterson, a renowned heart surgeon who was advising on the equipment purchases, Kate found herself struggling to follow his technical explanations about surgical procedures and recovery protocols. She nodded appropriately and asked relevant questions, but she felt as though there was a growing fog between her brain and the information being presented. As the reception concluded and guests moved into the main ballroom for dinner, Kate realized that her legs felt unsteady beneath her. She attributed it to the long day and the high heels she had been wearing since early morning. But William noticed that she was moving more slowly and carefully than usual. The dinner seating had been carefully planned to place Kate between two major supporters who had specifically requested the opportunity to discuss their ongoing projects with her personally. To her right was Sir James Morrison, whose technology company had funded several pieces of cutting-edge medical equipment. To her left was Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatric cardiologist who wanted to discuss research funding priorities. As the first course was served, Kate engaged in simultaneous conversations about both medical research and technological innovation. She managed to maintain her end of both discussions while barely touching her food, though William observed that her responses were becoming slightly less detailed and spontaneous than her usual conversational style. The main course featured herb-crusted salmon with seasonal vegetables, but Kate found that the sight and smell of food was making her feel slightly nauseous. She moved the food around her plate and took small sips of water while continuing to focus on her dining companion's concerns about funding allocation and project timelines. Dr. Chen was passionate about a new research initiative studying genetic factors in congenital heart defects. Kate listened intently as the doctor explained complex genetic research methodologies and potential breakthrough treatments. However, as the conversation progressed, Kate found it increasingly difficult to process the scientific details and formulate intelligent responses. Sir James shifted the conversation to discuss the integration of artificial intelligence in diagnostic equipment. Kate had previously been very interested in this topic and had visited several hospitals to see the technology in action. Tonight, however, she struggled to recall specific details about the equipment she had seen and the conversations she had had with technicians and doctors. As the dinner courses continued, Kate's discomfort was growing more pronounced. The ballroom felt increasingly warm despite the air conditioning, and the combination of conversation, background music, and clinking dinnerware was creating a cacophony that seemed overwhelming. She began to feel slightly dizzy and realized that her vision was occasionally becoming slightly blurry. William, seated across the table, was watching Kate with growing alarm. He could see that her usual animated expression had become more fixed and that she was gripping her water glass more tightly than necessary. When their eyes met briefly, he could see confusion and concern that she was working hard to hide from her dinner companions. The auction portion of the evening was scheduled to begin shortly after dinner concluded, and Kate was expected to introduce several of the premium items personally. She had notes about each piece, including artworks donated by famous artists, luxury vacation packages, and exclusive experiences like private tours of royal residences. As the dinner plates were cleared and the auction preparations began, Kate excused herself to visit the ladies' room and review her notes one final time. Standing in front of the ornate mirror, she was alarmed by her own reflection. Her skin had a grayish pallor, and despite her careful makeup application, she looked genuinely ill. Kate splashed cool water on her wrists and pressed a damp paper towel to the back of her neck, hoping to counteract the increasing dizziness she was experiencing. She reviewed her auction notes, but the words seemed to swim slightly on the page, making it difficult to focus on the details she needed to remember. When she returned to the ballroom, the auction was already beginning with smaller items. Kate took her seat at the head table, next to the podium where she would soon need to present the evening's major auction pieces. The auctioneer's enthusiastic voice echoed through the ballroom as bidders competed for weekend getaways and restaurant packages. As her turn to speak approached, Kate felt a wave of anxiety that was unlike her usual pre-speech nerves. This was a more physical sensation of unease, accompanied by the feeling that her heart was beating too quickly and her breathing was becoming slightly labored. The auctioneer called her name, and Kate rose from her chair to approach the podium. As she stood, the room seemed to tilt slightly, and she had to pause for a moment to steady herself. William immediately stood as well, moving toward her with a concerned expression, but Kate waved him back with what appeared to be a confident gesture. At the podium, Kate gripped the sides for support while beginning her introduction of the first premium auction item, a week-long stay at a luxury resort in Tuscany, donated by the resort's owner who was in attendance. Her voice was clear and enthusiastic as she described the property's amenities and the exclusive experiences included in the package. However, as she continued speaking, Kate began to feel increasingly disconnected from her own words. She could hear her voice describing the vineyard tours and cooking classes, but it felt as though someone else was speaking. The bright auction lights seemed to be growing more intense, creating an almost blinding glare that made it difficult to see the audience clearly. She moved on to the second item, a private art collection viewing followed by dinner with a celebrated British artist. Kate had met the artist several times and enjoyed discussing his work, but tonight she found herself struggling to recall details about his recent exhibitions and artistic techniques that she had previously discussed knowledgeably. The third auction item was a behind-the-scenes experience at one of the royal residences, including a private tour and tea with palace staff. This was always one of the most popular auction items, and Kate typically enjoyed sharing stories about palace history and traditions. Tonight, however, she felt as though she was reading from a script rather than speaking from personal knowledge and experience. As she concluded her presentation of the premium auction items, Kate felt a sudden, intense wave of dizziness unlike anything she had experienced earlier in the day. The room seemed to spin around her, and she gripped the podium desperately, trying to maintain her balance and composure. The audience, focused on the exciting auction bidding, didn't initially notice Kate's distress. She stood frozen at the podium, struggling to regain her equilibrium while the auctioneer continued encouraging bids for the royal experience package. William, however, had been watching her intently and immediately recognized that something was seriously wrong. Kate's face had gone completely pale, and he could see that she was swaying slightly despite her grip on the podium. Without hesitation, he rose from his seat and began moving quickly toward the stage. Kate tried to take a step away from the podium, intending to return to her seat, but her legs suddenly felt as though they couldn't support her weight. She felt herself beginning to fall backward, and panic flashed through her mind as she realized she was about to collapse in front of 400 people and numerous photographers. In that critical moment, William reached her side. His years of military training and his intimate knowledge of Kate's body language had allowed him to anticipate her collapse by mere seconds. As Kate's legs gave way beneath her, William's strong arms caught her around the waist, pulling her against his chest and preventing her from hitting the floor. The ballroom fell silent as guests realized what had happened. Camera flashes erupted as photographers captured the dramatic moment, but William's only concern was Kate's well-being. He supported her full weight while quickly assessing her condition and determining the best way to help her. Kate's eyes fluttered open as William held her securely against him. She was conscious, but clearly disoriented, looking up at him with confusion and embarrassment. "William," she whispered, her voice weak and uncertain. "I've got you," he said firmly but gently, his voice carrying both reassurance and authority. "You're going to be fine." The gala's event coordinator and medical staff, who were always present at large events, immediately rushed to the stage. William carefully helped Kate to a nearby chair while maintaining his protective stance beside her. The house lights were brought up, and the auctioneer called for calm while medical personnel assessed Kate's condition. Dr. Matthews, the event's medical supervisor, quickly checked Kate's pulse and blood pressure while asking about her symptoms. Kate was responsive and alert, though clearly exhausted and embarrassed by the public nature of her collapse. William answered questions about her activities throughout the day while keeping one hand reassuringly on her shoulder. The decision was made to move Kate to a private room within the hotel where she could rest and be properly evaluated away from the crowds and cameras. William scooped her up in his arms, carrying her with the same protective strength he had shown during their wedding rehearsal when she had stumbled on the cathedral steps years earlier. As they left the ballroom, the guests remained standing respectfully, many with tears in their eyes as they witnessed William's tender care for his wife. The evening's fundraising had been successful beyond expectations, but everyone present would remember it primarily for the powerful demonstration of love and partnership they had witnessed between the royal couple. In the quiet privacy of the hotel suite, Kate finally allowed herself to fully acknowledge how unwell she had been feeling. With William holding her hand and the medical team ensuring she was stable, she could finally rest and begin to recover from her day of extraordinary dedication and service.